Okay, can everyone hear me? Well, somebody said no to that question, so I'm sure you can. Good morning, everyone. I've been asked to introduce the day and to try and create some kind of smooth passage from one person to the next, and I'm sure that we'll be able to do that, but I think I should introduce myself first. I'm Ken Grant. At the moment, I'm running the documentary photography program here at Newport and have a responsibility to work with the undergraduate as well as the MFA and occasionally with the PhD research students. I also contribute to the Research Centre, which is essentially a particular name for a group of like-minded individuals who are interested in making work happen by supporting other photographers and other students to work through and to initiate projects. So it's my pleasure to welcome you this morning to the latest in a line of symposia. I think it's a symposium rather than a conference. It's really a one-day talk, and the idea being that we get together people who are able to talk about really quite important, exciting practice. The reason for doing that is that we, over the years, asked certain people from the staff with particular interests to put together a piece of information around a particular topic, and we asked them to get maybe 3 or 4 people who could push some of these ideas forward by talking intensely and creatively about their preoccupations or their interests around particular ways of working. So in the past we've had things like Martin Parr's photo book talk with people like John Gossage and Chris Boot. We've had Roger Ballon and Kelly Poe and Tim McMillan, which came together as a talk around the idea of the animal in photography, which was a very particular research interest of one of our members of staff. So this is the latest in a line of those. So through these regular events, occasionally the interest is such that we're able to expand on work in collaborations. And so the reason for coming to this venue is really because the interest is greater than what we could do on a day in Newport. So I'm really glad that so many people have been able to arrive here this morning. The format of the day is pretty straightforward, and if you've had a chance, you would have picked up one of these leaflets on your way in. There's 2 things to pick up. There's probably, in fact, there's more than 2 things to pick up. There's a BJP which illustrates some of the ideas behind today's event. There's also a research brochure which illustrates something a little bit more along the lines of some of the research staff and students who've been working through the university in more general. But today's around the idea of the portrait, about the idea of the portrait from birth to death. And it's a move away from, if you like, a lot of photography that seems quite dominant at the moment, in the sense that there's a lot of projects around which are maybe around the idea of the inanimate, around the idea of the landscape, around the idea of malevolence within the landscape, around the idea of architectural detail, a kind of quiet photography, or as David Campley once suggested, a late photography. And it's kind of interesting that the photographers that have been chosen today by Colin Pantle, who's one of our master's students about to finish his master's with us, are all very much involved with dealing with the person, dealing with the idea of the portrait, and dealing with the idea of the proximity to real people, to real ideas, and to the present. And maybe through doing something so specific, they can think of some of the things that unlock are around the ideas of the processes of transition from one age to another, the particular effects that those changes incur, particular opportunities that people have in those kinds of situations and through those kinds of changes. I'd like to just talk to you a little bit through the timetable, and then I'll bring on the first speaker. But there's been a slight change to the timetable, and I'll tell you one of the changes in a few moments. But the first change is that Wendy will be speaking second and Torrell Branch will be speaking first. So that's a very minor change. I'll just talk a little bit about some of the people we've invited today. Wendy Ewald's had a substantial career in photography as both a teacher and as an artist, a practitioner. Her work employs a collaborative strategy that facilitates the voices and visions of her young subjects. Based in New York, she She's currently preparing her latest publication with Stidle Books and is currently completing a commission in Margate, working with young immigrant children. Rinika Dextra has an equally prominent position in photography over the last 2 decades. Her portraiture is held in many significant collections worldwide, and her practice has also accommodated video works as a way of looking further into the point of transition, perhaps, between adolescence and an uncertain maturity. Toril Brancher, who we'll be meeting shortly, was a student at Newport over the last decade. She completed her master's with us and then went on to work on a number of initiatives, working with the wider community through facilitation of workshops. But the project that she's probably going to talk about more significantly for today is in a sense a kind of autobiographical work around her family and around teenagers, around her own teenagers, and the idea of watching that transition and being close to that transition, but maybe with the clarity of a photographer. Paul Kranzler is probably one of the lesser known, certainly in Britain at the moment, but I was really pleased that he was able to accept our invitation, because I think the work that he's making is pretty special. And I first came into contact with Paul when he was looking around and contacting a lot of people around Europe to look at ways of extending his own photography, his own research. And at the time he was about to come over to Wales, but then moved in different directions and ended up publishing his first book, Land of Milk and Honey, which I think personally is and you'll see it, I think it's a really important contribution to the idea of photographing old age, but also the idea of the photo book itself, because there's certain things in the book that probably shouldn't work that actually do work, and I'm kind of interested to hear him talk through the logic and the ambition for that process. And finally, Larry Sultan shouldn't need too much of an introduction, but he's going to get one. Larry Sultan, to me, came into my mind when I first saw the evidence book with Mike Mendel. But then what became more appropriate in terms of my own interest was his book Pictures from Home, where he worked with the collaboration, the cooperation, or the lack of cooperation of his own parents, and somehow informing a kind of strategy which has been employed by photographers since, managed to create a kind of photography which at once spoke about the personal, but maybe spoke a little more pertinently about the wider American society. As a teacher and a photographer, he's pretty exceptional, but also exceptional photographers can have illnesses and bad backs, and Larry Sultan's one of those photographers, and he's currently got a really serious condition that he's dealing with. So rather than cancel, and this is where it gets really quite nervous for anyone who's standing behind stage here, he's agreed to do a video link, a conference. So he's going to present his work, but he's going to present his work through iChat, essentially. And it was worked on yesterday, so whatever the time is in California, we'll probably have Larry Sultan in his pajamas at about 4 o'clock this afternoon. Okay. Throughout the course of the day, there's going to be different things available for people to consider. There's books available outside, and there certainly will be by the end of this session. I know that Wendy's got some of her latest work for sale outside, and people might want to meet with her and talk about that and take advantage of that. But then by the time that this afternoon comes, Photo Gallery will be here, so by lunchtime I'd imagine there'll be a setup so that you can see some of the Photo Gallery publications, which are always quite interesting and well worth looking through. If you're not from this part of the region, part of the area, you might not know too much about them. The format of the day, if we start with Toril, we'll move straight into Wendy's talk afterwards, but between that there'll be time for questions. It might be 10 or 15 minutes questions, I guess. There are 2 roving mics which will present themselves when the lights come up, you'll see them. So I think it's one of my jobs to try and keep things to time and to try and drag people off if they're not already off, and push people on if they won't go on. So we're going to kind of try and keep on track, and then 12:15 to 1:15 we'll have lunch. And you can probably discover the delights of Newport if you just step over the crossing and the roadworks, you're right in the city centre, so if you take advantage of that time to just get a little bit of fresh air and a little bit of space. Then in the afternoon, we're starting at 1:15 with Rinica, and then follow that pretty quickly with Paul Kranzler's talk. But then in the printed sheet, the yellow printed sheet that you've got, what it doesn't account for is a 20-minute interval after Paul Kranzler's talk. And I think 2 speakers is plenty before we have a break. So the idea being that we'd have 20 minutes recess so we can set things up. So that's a good opportunity for a bit of a comfort break. Then to finish the day at 4 o'clock, Larry Sultan will do his presentation, and he'll be able to take questions, but he won't be taking part probably through logistics, otherwise he won't be taking part in a wider discussion at the end, which will be hosted by Senior Research Fellow Russell Roberts. Okay, so I'm hoping I haven't left too much out. And I'll welcome Toril Brancher. Toril.
Is my youngest daughter, Emily. She's on the beach somewhere in West Wales. She's just spent a very nice day in the rock pools with some good friends. And she's right down that bottom end of the beach. You know, the tide is out, loads of sand around her, and she's, as far as I remember, she's got her feet in the water. This image is from a series titled Meantime. And the work is, in the main, about Emily and her 2 closest friends at the time. And then as they grew slightly older, their more extended friendship group were included in the work. The time is set around the time when they became teenagers. So she was about 12 years old when I started making this work. And then they rolled into 13, some of them 14. I want to look at this series, Meantime, today, but in the context of the previous work I had made. I do believe it's quite interesting with hindsight to look how one thing seemed to have just followed so seamlessly, one thing after the other. Now, of course, it never seemed like that at the time. It is also quite useful to see how the earlier work informed the later work. So it all began, really, with a year that I spent in the school playground in our local junior school at lunchtime. Quite possibly because I am from Norway. I grew up in Oslo, and I never went to school in Britain. I've always been quite mystified by what on earth people do all day. You know, what do children do all day at school? Because I only went for a couple of hours when I was that age. And I was particularly intrigued by the lunch hour. And in a way, it's the only time left to children where they can play undirected by adults. So this was also what attracted me to this particular hour in the day. Now, in this school, there was at the time, I'm sure they don't do this anymore, but there was a queue to go to have their lunch. So if you were unlucky, you'd spend most of your lunch break at the back of the queue. But it was very good for me because I ended up spending the early part of my time there, sitting at the front of this queue. So I could get to know every single child in the school. And I would talk to them about my camera and my photography and what I wanted to try to achieve by being there at their lunch hour. And of course my main aim was to try and make images that were kind of describing how it felt to be there rather than how it looked. Now, I must have been the very, very last photographer ever to have been given permission to photograph in the junior school at lunchtime. In the current climate of photography in children, it's unlikely that any of you that are students today would be given permission to do that. And similarly, I must have been the very last photographer to have been given permission to do the same a year later in the comprehensive school. And the way I went about asking for permission was I took my photographs from the junior school up and talked with the head of the comprehensive school, and after a bit of thinking he said, oh, okay then, I'm sure it'll be fine. So that was that. And this was, it's about 10 years ago now actually. I have to say that again, curiosity was my main motivator. You know, at the time, again, there was the lunch hour was about an hour and 15 minutes, and I think at the time there was some dispute about teachers not wanting to spend their time supervising the kids. So actually, they were free to do whatever they wanted, and in this particular place, they were also allowed to leave the school grounds. I was, at the time, it was something that I just became very aware of at the time, and it's still, I think it was written about in The Guardian this week, so it's still a current topic, that a lot of people are frightened of groups of teenagers. And of course I was having teenagers at home, my own teenagers at home at the time, and they seemed so fragile, so this idea of being frightened of them, even in a gang, seemed like something worth investigating. So maybe not so very surprisingly, I found that the most interesting activities took place at lunchtime, not of course in the school grounds, but outside. And the place where you're looking from here was an area generally referred to by the kids as over the road. And we're looking, the other side of the road here is the main entrance into the school. So we are standing over the road, as it were, looking into the school area. And the over the road became the title of this work that I made there. And a lot of the activities you would imagine to take place here did in fact happen. And again, I'd say as a photographer, my main aim was very much to make images that reflected the experience of being there. So I needed to get right in there in order to achieve that, as I was not particularly interested in how it all looked from a distance. And of course, these teenage years are not very easy years. And I felt that this space that they had, or did not have as the case may be, they really didn't help them. You know, they were outside, there was a piece of tarmac, and it was great, of course, on nice, sunny, warm days. But as we all know, there's not that many of those in the British winters. And they were cold and wet. And yeah, could have been better, I think. Why did they let me do it? I don't know, honestly. I think possibly they identified with the fact that I was a student at the time and I had a project to do. They also always had projects to do, of course. And the guy in the car here, the one in the passenger seat, looking back at me, he was very skeptical at first, but as we got talking, he was telling me that his aunt had gone back to education as an adult, and when he heard what I was doing, he was quite impressed, and he said, you know, good for you. And that was that. So I think if there was anything I did or said that made me more acceptable than any other adult might have been, it could only really be the fact that I was so curious and that I had no opinion about how they should or should not behave. I was genuinely just interested to know what it was like to be there. You know, it didn't seem that long ago that I had been a teenager sneaking out of school myself. And of course the camera did, without a doubt, give me a license. I'm sure without it there would have been no interest in having me there whatsoever. And there is something about the attention of the lens that I think at some times can be enjoyable for some people. Towards the end of the year, by the end of the year, I had gotten to know some of these kids very, very well indeed. And they invited me to go out with them or, partying, as they thought that would provide me with some very good material for my new project. They said, you should come out with us, Toril, then you'd really get some good pictures. And I did try, but somehow it just never really worked. So I was looking around for another purpose for my work when my own teenage daughter, then 14 at the time, agreed to being photographed as she was getting ready to go out with her friends. And the deal here, this is the very first photograph I made, and the deal was that I was not allowed to comment on the fact that she was going to pluck her eyebrows, and then it was going to be okay. Then another friend of hers agreed to be my subject as well, and then gradually I became an accepted part of the activity as they would gather in gangs to share wardrobes and makeup for best effect to go out. And they would spend hours on this activity, and it was absolutely understood that I could go there but no further, So, but of course they didn't really have anywhere to go. This is in a small market town, and there's no social life for young teenagers, and being that economic group that is not really an economic group, they have no money. But then gradually, as they got slightly older, they sort of moved onto the street corner, and then occasionally there was somebody having a birthday party. And equally gradually, as they moved on and out onto the street, they decided slowly but surely that it was okay that I came too. I was making this work with a 645 medium format, which I was looking down into. I had a hand grip on it, which had a flash, and then that's the bounce card. So it was all quite reasonably big. It's not huge, but comparatively speaking, quite big in this kind of situation. So there was absolutely no chance of being this fly on the wall. I was also making the work with a slightly wide lens, so I am as close as it looks. And I think it's important to realize that there's absolutely nothing automatic about this way of making pictures. And it really did take all my concentration to see what I was looking for and to focus. Right? And one consequence was that I really could never hear what they were talking about. I just didn't have any energy or concentration, whatever, left to listen as well as looking. And of course they realized that I wasn't hearing. So in a way that made it more acceptable for them that I was there, the fact that I wasn't there to eavesdrop, as it were. And the other thing, the reason why it might have been quite difficult for me to hear, you can't see it of course, but they were playing very loud music. I think it must have been Green Day era or that kind of thing. It was very loud and hard to hear anything anyway. This is the night of a great bonding experience. And as you can see, they're all in the playground. There's two people at the end there hanging upside down, and they're sharing a piece of chewing gum. And it had been a very, very noisy evening. I think there must have been these sort of gang shouts, when everybody gets together and just kind of roar all at the same time. And somebody in this neighborhood got very fed up with it and called the police. And then somebody got wind of the fact that the police were coming, and all the kids just ran away. So I was standing there in this playground with my camera and my flash and my bounce card and thinking, oh, ran as well. And I was hiding behind the bushes with the gang of teenagers. And I was really considered all right after that. So I was allowed to go anywhere. At the same time of photographing my daughter and her friends, my son in the Umbro shirt here agreed to me photographing him and his friends. I can't actually remember anymore how that came about, but I think possibly the fact that the girls were it was such a girly group that I felt I needed a sort of boy group to sort of balance it all up. And this boy group, which was really not the very best boys in town, I have to say, they'd been given a space by the parents of one of the boys for the winter. It's a garage. And they have a sofa in there and television and loads of drinks, obviously a storage cupboard. And to this day, I am not quite sure if these parents were a little bit dull or just ignorant or very, very clever. Because the boys did what the boys did, but they did it in that garage and not anywhere else. With hindsight, again, and I really did not realize at the time, but my son definitely made things happen for me to photograph because I was there with a camera. And I think that he made things happen that would happen anyway, but might not have happened at that particular time unless I was there. So I'm quite confident that the images are accurate representations of what was going on in the garage at any other time, but I could not have made them without him. And interesting as well that I did not realize at the time. I did mention this to him at some later date, saying that, asking if that was in fact the case, that he had made these things happen. He was going like, yeah, sure. And how on earth did I not realize at the time? But there you go. Now, this is a picture of a pylon. For those of you who don't know what pylons are, it means that loads of people throw themselves on top of each other. And there is actually a sofa somewhere at the bottom of all of that. I'd like to remind you all that I was shooting this with the wide lens. And I'm a lot smaller than all of those boys. And I'm speaking before, but not me. So it's without a doubt that making these photographs with my kids transformed our relationship. When I was out with them, I was strictly the photographer and the photographer only. As far as I can remember, this was never really discussed, just agreed. I didn't really want to be the responsible adult with a gang of wild teenagers because my ambition was to make the photographs. And they, of course, did not want an adult telling them what to do. So, in a way, it was in the interest of both sides that we stayed within our boundaries. Now, as anybody who have lived with teenagers might know, and maybe people who have recently been teenagers, it can be a very difficult time between parents and young people. And from the parents' point of view, you suddenly have these people around who always make a mess and never pick up after themselves. They're permanently hungry and can be rather difficult to live with. So I found, when I went out with my kids and saw them, with their friends, that my kids are really great people. They were very loyal, very kind friends. They have a fantastic sense of humor. And they were really nice people. And I believe that we developed a mutual respect for each other through the making of this work that we may not have done otherwise. So when I asked my youngest a few years later, if she would like to be my subject matter for a project, she was very, very keen to experience that relationship that she had observed already. And I believe it was an informed decision on her part to be the focus of the lens, to have that kind of attention, and to develop that kind of relationship. So most of Emily's friends either had had older siblings who were the friends of my older teenagers who had already been photographed, or they had been photographed by me in the school playground all those years earlier, right? It was quite a long time, but they remembered. So when I were met with them in large groups anywhere, I recognized them and they recognized me, and it was never an issue about getting to know each other or making agreements. To them, I suppose, in a way, I was that woman taking pictures of the kids in Abergavenny again. So access and parental consent is obviously not a problem when working with your own kids. But I have to say, there is nothing particularly automatic about being allowed into their space. There still has to be negotiation, give and take. In many ways, it was much more difficult to work with kids this young than it had been with the slightly older ones, because they just couldn't see me not as a mum. I could never step into the role of just being the observer and being the photographer, as I was so they just carried on seeing me as a parent. So in some ways it was easier because people were used to me and I didn't have to ask permission, but in other ways it was not so easy. And then as a photographer, I think I had changed. Maybe you could call it mature or developed. But I felt that my image making had become far more deliberate, and I was far more aware, certainly, of work that influenced my image making, and I wanted to use that awareness. So this image is a reference to Imogen Cunningham and her work with her twin sons. There are sort of two of her images that particularly inform this one. And if anybody wants to go and look for it, it's in the book called On the Body. I also really wanted to challenge that tradition of photography made in South Wales. This is not about black and white and grainy and rainy and hardship. That's quite a good place to be. So, like Paul Cabot, who's in here somewhere, I also wanted to use the weather and the blue skies. They're not a coincidence. So last night was hard to believe that it does not always rain in Wales. And of course these kids did have a pretty good deal. They were comfortably well off. They did well enough in school and they had reasonably secure homes. So the three girls then, Emily and her two closest friends, were very involved actually in the early stages of the image making. So I couldn't just sort of hang around and observe them. So we would get together and look at other work made by teenagers, and talk about the work that we'd made together, and then they would look at photographs that we made, and they became very aware of their visual presence, and a couple of them became very skilled at being photographed. And Rian here was my absolute star. Again, remind you of my wide lens, because I am totally in her face, and she knows that I need to focus or there's no picture. And she was just amazing. She had not so much stop or hold it, just slow down just enough so that I could get it. And it was very nice to have that. I'm very appreciative of that. And this picture is from a gathering they were going to. They gathered to get ready, and it was a Wear What You Dare party, which could be quite dodgy, really. But she'd given it a lot of thought, and she looked really good. And she was just ready to go, only to realise that she'd completely forgotten to think about her shoes. And of course, she didn't have any shoes to go with that kind of outfit, other than trainers or heavy boots. So that is a total moment of total devastation. A lot of the images in the series would come together through us all discussing where we would go. May find places of significance, locations that had meanings to them. They would then do what they would do anyway in those places, and I would photograph them. As a method of working, I suppose this is comparable to setting the stage but not having a script. So I'd like to think of it as a mixture of the setup and the observed. So despite a lot of the blue skies, this was not a very good summer weather-wise. And we had not been to this river at even once. And we all felt that the river had to feature in this story, because this is where they'd spent all their summers as young children, where they'd had that daring first ride down the scary water slides. Not those plastic made-up ones in the pool, but the natural ones on the rocks. And they spent sort of seemingly endless warm days on the rocks. So anyway, late in this summer we went, and despite the goose pimples and the freezing cold water, we had quite a nice time, and I think this is one of my favorite pictures. I should tell you that Emily doesn't like it, because she doesn't like her hair in this picture. Then, as they got older, we're well into being 13 now, maybe even getting closer to the 14, their friendship group got much bigger. And the form of socializing began to change. And they were not so interested in discussing with me where they were going to go anymore. So it became a case of me following along. And I thought I could revert, as it were, to my previous way of working, that I could just be the observer of something that would happen anyway. But it was not entirely successful, because they just couldn't shake that sense. They were still not old enough to shake the sense of me being a parent. And then I reached a point where I felt that I had actually been there before. It's like I'd gone full circle and arrived at where I had started with the previous work. And it all kind of came to a natural end. In this picture, a little kid has thrown a lot of cut grass on this boy's hair, and it's because he's got so much product in his hair, it's stuck like glue, so the girls were picking it off. And last week I was talking to Fran's mum on the right here, and she's just gone to university now, and she said, she's still got that picture on her wall. So I thought, fine, really nice. So at the time of making this work, I was particularly interested in the representation of the idyllic. I was fascinated by people like Vanessa Bell and her family album. She was a painter and designer in the early 20th century, elder sister of Virginia Woolf. And she photographed her family life within the Bloomsbury Circle. Her family album is published, and I'm sure it's at the University Library here. And just as Vanessa Bell's images covered a multitude of emotional turmoil, so do these meantime pictures. As somebody said to me recently, friendships at that age are sometimes very cruel. And when I was putting this talk together, I thought now is a good time to ask these girls how the work has influenced them, if at all, and how they feel about the images now. Emily is now 18 and she's studying art in London. So I asked her, and she confirmed that she remembers very strongly being desperate to make work with me, that she was, she'd been watching the other two being photographed and having that kind of relationship with me, and she was absolutely desperate to do the same. And she said that she remembers that we had a really great time making the pictures. So I thought, phew, great, that's good. But when looking back on the pictures, when she looks through the images, she's mainly reminded of the very great difficulties she had at that time. These were 3 girls living in the same street, in the same neighborhood, and it was not always so easy to get along. And her comments made me think about how we are always told told that, how we're always told that our memories are shaped by the family albums, the pictures that are made. And then we end up hearing stories about the pictures that we have and everything else kind of disappear. And I was kind of bemused a little to realize that my attempts at creating these idyllic images obviously had very little effect on her memory. Rian, who is upside down here, has also gone on to study art, and I went to her final A-level show last summer, and her main piece is quite a large painting, which I thought was very good, of a girl on the swing in the park, and I was standing there feeling a real connection with her for having made that picture, as it very much reminded me of my own work. And in a way, I would like to think that that is a confirmation of the fact that making the work was a collaboration. Another incident of how the images kind of affected their experience was that they went on a school trip to the Tate Modern, and were in the art, in the bookshop afterwards, and Emily said she'd been looking around, and all of a sudden she heard Rian from the other side, and she's going, Em, come here, quick. She's looking at this magazine, this is Portfolio magazine, which had the Meantime pictures in it, and she hadn't seen them in there before. She's going, oh, God. And then they were talking about how seeing the photographs could really make them see how much they'd changed and how fast things were moving. Even being that young, they could see that. So then I thought it would be interesting too, maybe useful even, to know how Catherine feels now. She's a philosophy graduate and she currently lives in Oslo, and I asked her to have a little think about how she felt about the pictures and the work we made. And she replied in an email. So I'm going to read bits of it to you. She says, I don't know if at the time I had any thoughts about being your subject and daughter. It just was that way. There were no issues or problems. You were just there and took photos whilst we got on with things. Looking back on it, I can see that in itself is quite amazing. Really, the whole subject-daughter thing, that there were no issues about what we said or did around you. In some ways, I think it's refreshing that you saw the reality of it all. And I think that the kids felt quite liberated by the fact that they knew that I knew, so there was no need to pretend or to hide anything. Well, Catherine goes on to say that I think there are some parents that are so scared about what their kids get up to and in brackets she says, and to be fair, in some cases they should be. I suppose if you dabble a bit in what's dangerous, that's part of the process of learning boundaries, which you have to learn if you're going to be able to grow up and look after yourself one day. I was also aware that I needed to be careful. And as the observing adult at the time, I understood that they knew that they needed to be careful. So that made me relax a bit. You know, I worried less, and therefore they had more freedom. And this is my last picture. The image is from the Meantime series, but the girl is from Good Night. She organised a party with her mum as a huge musical gathering in Abergavenny for her friends and all the young people in Abergavenny. There was no particular reason except for creating a space for people to have somewhere to go. Joe asked me to come and make pictures at this party. We had a very, very good night. Shortly afterwards, she became very, very ill. She's okay now, so I feel like it's okay that I tell you this. She was then, and she's now, one of Catherine's very best friends, and this is what Catherine writes about it. The photograph that generates the most emotion or impact on me is the one of Joe dancing, as that was the pivotal point where my childhood naivety or innocence definitely ended very clearly when she became ill. The image sums up the blissful innocence and makes me remember both that and the feelings after, all in one. Thank you.
Okay, can we have the house lights on, please?
Shall I leave that on?
Can we take any questions, observations, comments? Not stretching.
It's all clear.
Still there? We don't look like, but
I was wondering about the relationship between you photographing your daughters and then your son. Was it different?
Was it different? It's a good question. I don't think it was particularly different. It was very much that they were doing, I mean, it was very different what they were doing. You know, the girls were very much into the clothes and the makeup and the sharing of the stuff and trying out things and working on their appearance, you know, together. Whereas the boys who were 2 years older, if they did work on their appearance, they did it before they got together. So, yes. I did talk my son into me photographing him as he was getting ready to go out as well, but he doesn't like those pictures very much, and they haven't really become part of anything anymore. But in terms of being with them, it wasn't any different, I'd say, because I was there as the photographer, and I suppose that defined who I was.
But was there a difference as a woman photographing young
The
women
boys.
and a woman photographing young men? I mean, did the dynamic change at all?
You know, there is one picture, because I needed a balance. I needed a boy getting ready to go out. And one of the guys he must have been about 17 even at the time. And he said, yeah, sure, you can come home with me. And one of his friends were there with him as he was trying to decide what shirt to wear. But there was a moment as I was walking up the stairs to his bedroom and I met his dad. I was thinking, oh, he must think I am completely mad, really, you know. So yes, I suppose it did. Does that answer your question? Sort of.
top here. We've got Ty, come to the top of the mic, please. Oh, Ty. You just raise
Go
your
run.
hand again, please. Thank you.
I was just wondering if you were going to plan to document on your children's life now as they're older and go to photograph them to give them a stage of their life.
Yeah. Well, none of them live with me anymore, so it would be a case of when I visit. We always have the idea, we do talk about it actually, occasionally, but it just doesn't seem to be the main thing on our minds when we are together. I don't know. Somebody said maybe you're waiting for your grandchildren, and that is, of course, a possibility. I don't know.
It'd be nice to see that work if you do that.
Thank you.
Ty?
There's some here as well.
Just one up here.
I'd like to know if your children have any editorial input into the sense of the work and not that sense of it. Was there any negotiation? Because a lot of the actual photography is quite negotiated.
Yeah, yeah. There wasn't at the time when I was, putting the edits together, because it was, I suppose, so much about me trying to create the images that I wanted to, that I looked for. But in more recent times, they've stated, both my son and my youngest daughter, say about 2 images, that they can see that they are nice pictures, but they really don't want them seen around. So I have taken those out of the series.
Documentary about Sally Mann's story. The daughter said that she was addicted to the process of being photographed. And I wondered if you talked about the attention of the lens. Do you think children were more interested in that attention than the actual representation of themselves at the end? Or were they fully involved in that whole process?
Yeah. I didn't see the documentary, but I have seen interviews and read interviews with Sally Mann's children at other times. And I don't think that my children, certainly at the time, would have been able to differentiate between the two. And I think what they have enjoyed the most, and maybe even I, the fact that it has affected our relationship in such a positive way. So, all right.
There's a question just behind.
Toril, can you hear?
Toril,
I can hear now.
I'm interested in maybe hearing something about what happened to the photographs, because I know that primarily you intended from the outset for them to be exhibited, but they did end up in one of the Sunday supplements, and the way they used them was quite different than perhaps how they'd been used in the gallery. They kind of sensationalised it, but I kind of remember I can't quite remember the title of it. So the Past Spliff Mum was the title of the piece. Just want to say something about how that happened, and how you felt that fitted into your intentions of the project.
Well, it's interesting you mentioning that, because I think it has affected how I'm now quite reluctant to let the pictures go anywhere. What happened was I called the picture editor of The Independent on Saturday and went up with my portfolio and said, oh yes, we'd love to publish this, which they did. And I suppose quite naively, I left them free choice of all the images. And of course they chose the one with the long cigarette and put on the front cover. And I think it was something like "Pass the ashtray, Mum" or something. And those of you who know me as a very ardent anti-smoker, I did not really appreciate that. And I appreciate that it was entirely my fault, because I should have considered that as a possibility, but I hadn't. And I suppose the effect it has had on me now is that I realise that there are a lot of possibilities that I am not able to consider. So therefore, I am a lot more careful about where the pictures go. Is that okay? Yeah, awesome.
Is this what?
Toro,
Shall I?
There you are.
I was wondering, do you have text with these images?
Sorry, where's the voice?
Sorry.
All right, thank you. With the Meantime series, there is in the back a sort of condensed interview, so it's like an iVoice, little page, small page, from each of the three girls, where they speak about whether they think they are always going to be friends, and a little bit about the experience of being photographed. But other than that, there is just the title of the series and then the numbers of the images. I can hear you. Yes.
Now, I was particularly struck, Toril, when you were talking about the fact that the children earlier on were quite happy to be there taking their pictures. What they didn't want is for you to hear what they were saying. And I wondered, oh no, it's okay. And I wondered if you thought about that, maybe thought whether the children instinctively realised that perhaps words will always be much more dangerous than pictures ever can be, but they can still retain their kind of privacy behind the sort of the mask or the staging of these pictures. I don't just
Yeah, no, really good point. I'm sure that's how they felt, because I could hear the flow of the voices and everything sort of humming around me, and then somebody would suddenly say, "Oh, shh, Toral's here," and then they'd realise that actually I hadn't heard it, and I really never did have to pretend, because my concentration I needed to make the work is all the concentration I had. So that's how it worked. But yes, they obviously agree with you in that.
Conscious of time as well, and maybe some of the things that start to unpack here and carry on with in the session this afternoon. So, Toril, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's switch it over.